What is up? Welcome back to Mind Your Hormones, or welcome to Mind Your Hormones if this happens to be your first episode. I'm so happy you're here, whether this is your first or like 450th episode, whatever number we're up to. I don't even freaking know at this point. But I'm so excited to chat with you, as literally always. We're doing a little Q&A episode today. So I put up a question box on my stories on Instagram, and I'm like, drop some questions. I'm going to do a Q&A episode. We're going to answer a couple. And two of the questions that were asked were really good ones, and they're like kind of similar. So they have like similar answers. So I'm like, okay, this is perfect for a little quickie episode, but that's going to really help you because I know this is something that a lot of people are wondering or have been dealing with. And it's like a pretty straightforward answer. So it's going to be a good one. But before we get into this, I want you to know about this. And well, two things, right? Number one is if you have not yet downloaded my free Trying to Conceive masterclass and you are someone who is actively trying to conceive or you are going to start trying to conceive soon, download it. It's in the show notes. It's completely free. It's going to go over the major root causes of all fertility issues. I don't like saying fertility because I don't believe that it's like a finite thing. So the five major root causes just in general of all fertility issues. We're going to go over the major mistakes I see people who are trying to conceive making, and then 5 things you could do ASAP to boost your fertility for pregnancy. It is so freaking good. So I'll put that in the show notes for you if you have not yet downloaded it. So you could download that. And then the second thing is we are doing a giveaway in February. So for anybody who writes a review on the show in February, you're entered to win an Amazon gift card. And this is like, I do this for 2 reasons. Number one, I like seeing what you love about the show. I like seeing what you have to say about it. Like, because I'm talking to you and like, you might be like, oh, I love this. This is so amazing. But like, I don't know it. I mean, I love when you message me on Instagram, which is so exciting. If you're not connected with me on Instagram at Corinne Angelica, I answer my DMs over there. On TikTok, I don't because it's wild, wild west over there. And then my DMs are just like, I just like can't even. So if you message me on Instagram, I will answer you. But I love when you reach out. It's my absolute favorite. But when you write a review on the show, it also helps other people see that like it's a show that they might be interested in, right? Because it really like it's like part of like the algorithm, right? And this has to be on Apple Podcasts. You have to write the review on Apple Podcasts, and the more reviews, like the more good reviews you have on the show, the more it's going to push the show out to people who are looking for this type of content. And let's be honest, this is the best hormone and fertility podcast, so we want to make sure it's getting in the hands of other people, okay? Because we started learning this school, we sort of learned this shit in school instead of learning about fucking rocks, and more people need to get their hands on it. So I appreciate you so much for writing a review, even if it's just one simple sentence. It's such a great way to give back to me, to give back to the show, and you could be entered to win an Amazon gift card. Who doesn't want a fucking Amazon gift card, okay? Okay, those are the 2 things. Now let's get into the show. So the first question is, well, I'm going to read both questions because they're like very similar answers. So number 1 is, I ovulated on cycle day 8, but my period stopped on cycle day 6. Like, how is this possible? Is this bad for the lining, right? So essentially she's saying like, my period ended on cycle day 6 and then I ovulated on cycle day 8. Like, what's going on? And then the second question is, my period is 10 days late, but I took 3 negative pregnancy tests. What's the deal? So I'll start with the first one. Now, if you got your period and it ended on cycle day 6 and you said you ovulated cycle day 8, that can't happen, right? Like you that's way too short of a period of time. That's not enough time for you to actually go through the whole process of the follicles growing, the follicle bursting, you actually ovulating. Like it's just, that's way too quick of a turnaround, right? So one of 2 things, probably this is the thing that's most likely happening. You either did not have a true period and that wasn't your actual period, right? That was just like bleeding that happened because maybe you built up enough estrogen. And so because a period is not a sign of ovulation, right? So if you are just like basing the fact that like you're ovulating on you getting a period, that is not actually tracking ovulation. That is not confirming ovulation. You can bleed without ovulating. This recently has happened to me a couple of times postpartum because I'm still breastfeeding. So I got my period back. I don't know. I think it was like a year postpartum. I think it was like right either before or after her first birthday. And I'm still breastfeeding right now. I'm 20 months postpartum. A lot of people like don't even get it back till they're done breastfeeding. Whatever, that's a whole other conversation. But the point is, so I'll ovulate like kind of like every other month. It's still very irregular in this like postpartum still breastfeeding phase, because when you're breastfeeding, you have really high prolactin levels and that suppresses your ovulation. So it's like a very like delicate balance. But anyway, but there have been months where I've bled, but I knew that I didn't actually ovulate because I'm tracking my ovulation. But if I didn't know, like if I wasn't tracking my ovulation, I would think that's a true period, but it's not. So just because you're bleeding and you're seeing blood does not mean that you actually ovulated. So first and foremost is, do you know that you actually ovulated, right? Because if you're ovulating on cycle day 8, Is that because your app is telling you ovulated on cycle day 8? Is that because you had a positive LH strip? Because none of those things are confirming ovulation. The only thing that's going to be positively confirming ovulation, unless you like go to the doctor and like get tested or whatever, is tracking your basal body temperature. So if the person, if you or the person who's asking this question or anyone who's listening to this, if you're not tracking your basal body temperature and you're just saying like, oh, I ovulated on cycle day 8 because I got a positive LH strip and or because my app said I ovulated, that is not accurate. You did not, like, that you cannot confirm ovulation that way. So you have to be tracking your basal body temperature. I personally love Temp Drop. That's an armband you wear at night, overnight. It's super accurate. You don't have to wake up at the same time every morning to take it. Like, that's my absolute favorite. If you're someone who does wake up at the same time every morning, you could use like the under the tongue thermometer. I like Natural Cycles for that. So we'll put both of those links in the show notes. I have codes for both of them, so you could check those out. But you have to be tracking your basal body temperature. I'll also put another episode in the show notes, episode 123, of how to actually learn how to track it and read it and all of that stuff. So we'll put that in the show notes for you, but you have to be doing that because it's impossible for you to have had a true period where you ovulated, excuse me, where you ovulated and then you had a luteal phase and then you had a true period and then you ovulated 2 days later. That can't happen. So you most likely either never ovulated and you just were bleeding, and then maybe you did actually ovulate. You're like, no, Corinne, I confirmed ovulation on cycle day 8 with like, tracking my basal body temperature. I saw my temperature raise. It stayed higher the previous 6 temperatures, like all things you'll learn how to do it in that other episode. I'll link it below. You're like, no, I definitely confirmed ovulation. Okay, awesome. Then you probably didn't ovulate the cycle before, and that bleed that you just had could have just been your uterine lining shedding. But most likely, it's still a really quick turnaround. So like, I don't think that happened. So you most likely are not regularly ovulating and did not ovulate. And this is just like your body produced enough estrogen to build up your uterine lining, because estrogen is what builds up your uterine lining. So that's most likely what happened. And then you never produced progesterone to hold on to that uterine lining because you never ovulated. So that uterine lining just shed. And now you're bleeding, but there was no ovulation happening. So that's most likely what happened if that is your situation. And so I would, number one, look at that. Like, if you're using just LH strips, if you're using just an app, that's not accurate. You got to track your basal body temperature. Check out the episode 123. We'll put in the show notes of how to actually track it. And then you could look at my 2 favorite trackers too to make sure that you're actually doing that. Because you could also have other symptoms around this of like painful periods. It could be really, really heavy when you're bleeding. You can have maybe migraines, acne, PMS, mood swings, like cravings, like all these other things that could be around it. But based off of the information that you told me, ovulating on CD8, period didn't come till CD6, like there's something going on. That's a real quick turnaround. There's something amiss there. So I want to make sure that you are properly tracking your basal body temperature, because it's very unlikely that your follicles were able to grow enough and then burst, within from cycle day 6 to cycle day 8. Like, it's just very, very, I don't want to say impossible, so anyway, track your ovulation. That's most likely the missing piece here. And if you are not ovulating, if you're like, okay, Corinne, I found out I'm not fucking ovulating, what the hell? Obviously, the answer isn't how do I just get myself to ovulate, because that's not the root cause of the problem. The root cause of the problem is not that you're not ovulating. The root cause of the problem is what's causing you to not ovulate. What system in your body is not being properly supported that is resulting in you not ovulating at all, or you're not regularly ovulating. Okay. And that always goes back to those specific systems in your body that I teach you in the Mind Your Hormones method: your blood sugar and your nervous system regulation, your detoxification pathways like your gut and your liver, and your nutrient density. That is what we need to focus on. It's not like, oh shit, should I take wild yam cream or Vitex or blah, 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 blah. No. You need to get down to the root cause of the problem, because the reason why you're not ovulating or not regularly ovulating is because one of these systems in your body, or multiple probably, are not being properly supported. So I would highly recommend the Mind Your Hormones method. If that is where you're at, you could always use code podcast for 10% off. I'll put that link in the show notes. And if you are like, okay, I want to just take the first step, like I'm not ready for the full method, like the full roadmap, I just want that very first step, then I would recommend Balance Your Blood Sugar, which is, like I just said, your first and most important step to heal the first and most important step to improve your cycle energy and your fertility. It's one of the major root causes, like I just talked about, for fertility issues, cycle issues, all things. Your fertility literally can't improve until you regulate your blood sugar. So we'll put the link for that in the show notes as well. That's like such an amazing first step and a lower investment, obviously, because it's just, it's a smaller program. But anyway, that is where I direct you. Okay. Now, the second question is, my period is 10 days late and I took 3 negative pregnancy tests. Like, what the hell is going on? This happens all the time. All the time I see this happen. And here's what is most likely happening, where your period is probably not late. Because it obviously, if your period is 10 days late, if you can't have longer than a 16-day luteal phase. So if your like period is 10 days late, that would mean that you would have, like a 20-day luteal phase, or even longer than that, depending on how long your luteal phase is. It's impossible to have that long of a luteal phase and not be pregnant, and or like you maybe didn't ovulate, right? So we're going to go back to that of, okay, your period is 10 days late, your 3 negative pregnancy tests. Number 1, did you actually ovulate? Right? Because maybe you just didn't ovulate yet. So that's why you didn't get a period yet. So again, we have to confirm ovulation, not with LH strips, not with an app. So did you actually ovulate? Okay, so that we need to look at, because if you didn't, then that's why your period is not here yet. So you have to see if that actually happened. If you're not tracking it, then start tracking it. Same thing I just said with the previous question. The second thing is, maybe you did ovulate, but you ovulated later than usual. So it's not so much that your period is late. It's just that you ovulated later. So now like obviously your period is going to come later, because the date of your period is based off of the day that you ovulated. It's not just like, oh, I just always get my period on every 28 days. It's like, yeah, sometimes it happens for some people, obviously, but it's based off of the day that you ovulate. Sometimes people always ovulate on day 14, 15, 16, 17. Like it's different for everybody. Not everybody ovulates on day 14. Everybody's ovulation day is different. And your ovulation day can change each month, because your ovulation is, a reflection of your internal and external environment. So if you had extra stressors this month, if you were sick, if things change, your body is different. Like you're not a fucking robot. So your ovulation day can change, especially if you're someone with a reproductive disorder, you're trying to conceive, you're going through a lot of stress, like it can shift and change. So your ovulate, you could have just ovulated later this month and not even known it, especially if you're just using an app to track this, which most likely based off these questions for these two people, I'm assuming that's what's going on here. But like you could have just ovulated later, and then that's going to just push your period later, right? So it's like when you ovulate, then you produce progesterone, right? Then we're in our luteal phase, right? And again, once you ovulate, you confirm ovulation by tracking your basal body temperature, by seeing your basal body temperature increase by 0.3 to 0.5 degrees and staying that higher temperature for at least 3 days in a row. Again, look at that other episode. I'll put in the show notes for like a full depiction of this, okay? Ideally, we want that higher temperature. We want that luteal phase to be like 11 to 14 days. That's where we want your luteal phase to be. And then your period comes. So is your period 10 days late, or did you just ovulate later? So now your period is going to be later, or did you just not ovulate at all yet? Right? Because it's impossible to have a longer than 16-day luteal phase. So those are the two things that I'd be looking at. The main thing for both of you and anyone who's listening who's maybe having these types of concerns is tracking your basal body temperature. Do not rely on LH strips. LH strips are not confirming ovulation. They are just letting you know when your luteinizing hormone has increased. Just because your luteinizing hormone increases, that is generally letting you know that you're going to be approaching ovulation, but it does not confirm that you ever actually reach ovulation, especially for people who have imbalances and who have PCOS. A lot of times your LH can increase and then you never actually ovulate, right? And also, like an app, if it's just like you're just like using like Premom or Flow app or whatever, and it's like basing your ovulation day just off of when you input, like, okay, I got my period on this day and my period stopped on this day, and then it's like, okay, it has a little flower, like, okay, this is the day you're gonna ovulate. Then you're not a fucking robot, and you cannot rely on an app to tell you when you are ovulating. You might not even be ovulating just because you're bleeding. Like we said before, I have a whole other episode on that too, I believe, as well. We could put below in the show notes too, of like a bleed is not a sign of ovulation. So I could put that in the show notes as well. But the biggest thing for these two questions, and for you listening, if you are someone who you're like, okay, I bled until CD day 6, then it said I ovulated on CD 8, or like similar to that, or you're like, my period is fucking late, but I'm taking 3 negative pregnancy tests, like what's going on? You have to properly track your basal body temperature. If you're in the Mind Your Hormones method, you obviously have a full training on that, like your fertile window training. I always have my clients go back in this multiple times to really nail down how to properly track this, because even when you're using a tracker like Temp Drop or like Natural Cycles, which I do recommend, sometimes it'll still say like, oh, this is when you're ovulating, this is when you're expected. And it's not always accurate. Like you have to know how to read it yourself so you know what's actually going on. So that is my biggest thing for both of you listening. Start tracking. I'll put the link in the show notes for Temp Drop and for Natural Cycles. I'll put the codes that I have If you are someone who does not wake up at the same time every morning, maybe you're a parent or you are a shift worker, or you just don't wake up at the same time every morning, I would definitely recommend the armband temp drop, because in order for your basal body temperature tracking to be accurate, if you do under the tongue thermometer, you have to be waking up at the same time every morning, and you have to have sound sleep throughout the night. So if you're a parent, you're probably not getting sound sleep throughout the night, and you're probably not waking up at the same time every morning. And also, if you're a shift worker, that's not possible for you. So then I would recommend the armband. But if you're someone who you do wake up at the same time every morning, you have sound sleep in the middle of the night, like you're good to go, then you could totally use natural cycles underneath the tongue. But those are the two that I would recommend the most. And that is definitely where you guys need to start, with at least seeing what's going on. And then once you see, oh shit, I'm not ovulating, or I'm not regularly ovulating, or what the fuck is going on, or I'm ovulating, my luteal phase is less than 11 days, like I need help, then obviously the Mind Your Hormones method would be my next step for you. Or if you just want that first step instead of the whole roadmap, balance your blood sugar. And I'll put the link in the show notes for both of those, because that is for sure where I would recommend you going. But that is what is most likely happening if this is you. So I hope this was helpful for you. Let me know if this hit home with you. If you have other questions, always look on my Instagram. I'll do Q&A boxes once in a while, and I'll pull them for like the podcast. Sometimes I'll answer some on stories, but most of the time I pull them for podcasts or for posts and stuff. So that is that for today. Remember, you can leave a review to be entered into the giveaway. Check out that free Trying to Conceive Masterclass. And then obviously the tracker information will be in the show notes. The blood sugar program, my hormones method, all the things will also be in the show notes. But thank you as always for being here. I love you so much, and I will talk to you soon.
Thank you so much for being here. If you loved this episode and learned something valuable, please share it with a friend who you think would also love it, or post it on social media and tag me so I could personally say thank you for helping me spread this important message. I am beyond grateful to be here with you. So until next time, stay intentional, stay consistent, and always mind your hormones.